everybody, welcome to the Going Analog podcast, the show where board game industry guests bring their own topics and games to discuss. I'm Christina, your host, and you may have noticed that dragons are so hot right now. They really, really are. Books, movies, shows, especially games about dragons, especially Wyrmspan, the new game by Connie Vogelmann, developed by Wingspan designer Elizabeth Hargrave and published by Stonemaier Games. It's the spiritual successor to Wingspan, the classic bird engine building game, and a fantastic standalone game on its own, of course. I've literally taught and played Wyrmspan 5 times since we got it last month. I just played it 2 nights ago.
2 nights ago.
2 nights ago, yeah. And so every time I teach it, people are so into the art from Clementine Campardo. They're into the dragon fact compendium that's amazing, and the gameplay is fantastic. So I played it with people who are new to gaming, people who are more experienced with gaming, and universally everybody's really loved it. So we're excited to welcome back Connie and Elizabeth to Going Analog. We had Connie back on in December to discuss Apiary, which is a different thing. Apiary, the Space Bees game that I also love. We had a great time talking to her. So welcome back, Connie.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I remember at the end of our podcast, I asked you, hey, so, what's coming up for you? And then I could tell you were holding something back, and that something was Wyrmspan.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm excited to get to talk about it now.
Yay!
I think literally it got announced just not even a month later after her show. So we barely just missed the announcement.
Just trying to catch you just in case you forgot that you weren't supposed to talk about it, And then we had Elizabeth on not that long before then, a few months before, discussing Fox Experiment and Undergrove and Nerding Out also. So we can't get enough of both of you. So we're glad to have you on. Hi, Elizabeth again.
Hi, thanks for having us.
What will be your topic for us today?
Connie and I just spent a weekend at Unpub, the Unpublished Game Convention, and so our question was, what's your favorite event of the year for gaming?
Not just in general, but
or in general, yeah.
Yeah, we could talk about that too. We have our opinions too. We do our traditional several or handful every year. And Shu is here too, joining us. So hi, Shu.
Hi. That was a little bit of a late introduction, or an afterthought introduction, but
I'll take it. They're our guests, right? So you have to be polite. They go first.
Actually, it's funny because I was playing games earlier today, but I had a hard cutoff time because I had to make it to this podcast recording. And then my friends were saying, it's your podcast. Can't you just reschedule it? And I'm like, you don't understand. We have important guests on.
Yeah.
We scheduled everyone together to show up at this time to record. And then later, one of my friends was telling his wife, he's like, oh, Shu has to go because he has A-listers coming on their podcast. So I'm like, yep, can't miss it.
And so what is our topic going to be today?
Well, so it's interesting because, as you mentioned, Wyrmspan is the successor to Wingspan, and then, a lot of people are like, "Oh, what does Elizabeth Hargrave think about this? Who designed the original Wingspan?"
Because it wasn't secret; she knew about this.
Yeah, but we met some friends who don't follow industry news closely. They're not watching everything, and they're like. If some people thought it was a ripoff, some people thought it was a clone or a copycat. They didn't even realize this from the same publisher, and then they're like, "What does the original designer think?" And it's like, "Oh, well, Elizabeth also worked on this game." So we wanted to ask some questions about the making of Wyrmspan and how it kind of developed off of the sort of bones and the soul of Wingspan. So that's our topic.
Very excited to learn about that backstory. And in the beginning, we like to just talk about games. We'll each pair of us will talk about some games and chat about some recent gaming, highlight some stuff. And what game do we want to discuss today, Shu?
So our game is Wroth. It's spelled W-R-O-T-H. And then Christina and I kept making a joke oh, we're going to go play a game about our Wroth IRA or something like that. But it's not that Wroth. It's Wroth with a W. And it's designed and illustrated by Manly Tremblay, most famous for the Dice Throne series of games. But in this is an area control game with really cool art. You just have to go online to check it out. We played an early version of this at Dice Tower West, which is a convention. And then Chip Theory Games, the publisher, demoed it for us. Shout out to Amanda Panda and Bonzinator for letting us crash their demo. But
and Andrew for running the demo.
Yeah, and Andrew for running the demo. But basically, everyone has you have different factions that all have different powers and different units. But it's fairly simple. It's just like, okay, I have maybe 3 different types of units, and then so at the beginning of a round, there's a bunch of dice that are rolled, and then we take turns drafting, and then whatever's showing on the dice will show the action we could take. So sometimes it's like bringing in more troops to your sort of headquarters before you launch into the battle, or moving the troops across the area, or attacking and things like that. So it's really simple. Like, it doesn't take long to learn how to play. But then all the strategies in, like, okay, when do I attack? When do I move? I might not even be able to move or attack if that dice isn't available to me. So we got to play this. It's like really beautiful. Like, a lot of people stop by and just want to check. They're like, what is this? Because it's so colorful, but it's a little edgy, I would say, in terms of the art style.
A little bit like
alternative, like very modern comic book kind of style art.
Almost like punk, maybe.
Little punk, yeah. I don't have the right words to describe it, but yeah, it's a really beautiful game to look at, but it's super mean because it's not a big map. It's a very tiny map. Almost everyone is, as soon as you enter the sort of main map, you're almost immediately adjacent to everyone else. So you have to kind of watch everywhere that's going on. And then what's neat is, like, one faction that was played can set traps. And then so you just, like, if you go into their area, you don't know what kind of traps you're going to set off. One is, like, it's more powerful. The more of a certain type of unit is on the board, they get to attack more. And then I forgot what your faction does.
I forgot also.
Okay, well.
I did okay with it.
Yeah.
That's all I remember.
Yeah, well, we kept trying to pick on Christina because she was, like, as typical for an area control game, you try to take after the leader or take down the leader.
That was Amanda, though. Amanda was in the lead for a very long time. But
so yeah, and a lot of that, and a lot of arguing at the table of, like, why are you going after me? Go after Christina, she's ahead of me, or go after Amanda. There's a lot of that, and then a lot of, like, you hoping you don't get attacked, and then people start ganging up on you. So it has to be the kind of game you're very mentally prepared to just be like, people are going to be mean to you at some point. You're going to get attacked. You're not going to like it. You're going to lose territory. You're not going to gain any points. But it's very streamlined gameplay. Other than the fact that, similar to other games like Root, where you probably won't be good at the game unless you can understand what everyone else's powers are. It's
luckily they're very simple. They're on the player mats, which I appreciated. And Manny's like goal when he designed it was he doesn't actually like area control games, so he wanted to design one that he would actually like. So I see, like, a lot of the sort of very annoying minutia of some of like those sort of bigger area control games were sort of smoothed out. So I'm excited to see how it looks in the end.
Yeah. I will point out Amanda Panda, who's a content creator and one of our guests on our show before. She made a good point of, like, she's not sure what Manny Tremblay means by that, by saying, like, I want to make a game for people who don't like area control games.
Because it's still very area control.
It's still a very area control game. It's still very mean. So I'm not sure what he means by that. Maybe he wants it more combat focused.
Maybe just prettier. I don't know.
Yeah.
It is prettier, definitely.
Yeah. But it's a really neat game, but it's very aggressive. You have to have people who are, like, they're not going to get their feelings hurt. They're going to be okay getting attacked, and they're okay ganging up on each other to try to take certain people down. But the main thing I really liked about this game is that as you play, you start to feel really powerful. You get more income. You can use that income for special powers and things like that. You're excited to see the dice roll and see what kind of actions you can take and all that. So, like, it just feels very fast paced and very moment to moment. Like, there's a lot going on. There's not a lot of downtime in that.
Maybe that's what he means. He doesn't like the slog.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Cool. And then you two also had a game that you decided on to bring to talk about, and what was that?
Yeah, so we decided to talk about Knarr, spelled Knarr. So that one
Lots
I think
of
also
silent
needs
letters.
spelling. I know, right?
Yes.
So Knarr it's a very short, maybe 20-minute. I'm going to call it like a tableau building game, but that might not be quite accurate. Basically, it's Viking themed, but it could be just about anything. On your turn, you do one of two things. You either play a Viking, from your hand into your tableau. Then those Vikings go into one of 5 stacks based on color. And then when you play a card, you activate all of the benefits in that stack. or you are basically discarding some of the cards from your tableau to sort of buy these other cards, and the other cards either give you some kind of an ongoing income or they give you some kind of endgame points. And it's very quick. It's a race to 40 points, and it's one of these games that for the first 5 or 6 or 7 turns you're all kind of floating around between like 0 and 5 points. Now all of a sudden you just shoot around that track. And so for me at least, I think it's a really interesting game because I've played it about 6 times at this point. I keep introducing it to folks.
6 times already. When did you?
Because it's so short.
When did you get?
so
Well, we just played twice this afternoon on Board Game Arena, so
Yep.
Oh,
Yeah,
nice.
and it's on Board Game Arena now too.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Quick.
right.
yeah.
I picked it up a couple weeks ago at Awesome Con, which is a local board game convention. Or actually, it's not really board games. I think it's just sci-fi in general. But they have a really nice board game set up there. But the interesting thing is I think your starting cards really influence your strategy, and I think there's a lot of different ways to get points. So as much as the game is like very short, I think you can really kind of pick a lot of different paths. So at least for me, it's like has very interesting decisions on each turn.
Mm-hmm.
The thing
What did you think
about
it
it
was?
that was so interesting to me as a designer is how few cards are in the deck. It's got
Yeah.
like 20 something cards in the deck of Vikings, but you're just rotating through them, and if the deck runs out, people have to return cards from their tableau, which happened, I think, in both of the games that we played.
Yep.
And so, like, you're building up this little engine in front of you, but it can't get too good because eventually you're going to have to either spend those Vikings to score points by buying things with them, or you're going to have to return them just because everyone's hoarding their Vikings a little bit too much. This is an interesting dynamic.
Well,
Yeah, we just got. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Connie.
Oh, no, I was just going to agree with what Elizabeth was saying. I think it's really interesting that there are, these kind of different tracks you can go down, different types of income and different kind of points you can get, but there are so few Vikings that give you those benefits that sometimes they're all just in somebody's tableau and you're kind of out of luck. And I think you really have to look at their tableau and say, oh, they have all the Vikings that give bracelets, or they have all the Vikings that give recruits. I better go do something else because I know those cards are in somebody's tableau. They are not in the deck any longer.
Yeah. We just got a copy from Pandasaurus for full disclosure about a week or so ago, and we've already played it a couple of times. As you mentioned, it's really fast. It's like it takes no time to learn, no time to teach. But one of the things I like is I feel like this fits really nicely in a category of like, hey, people who are like maybe they've already played their gateway game, of like a super really beginner friendly game, and they're ready for something with a little bit richer, but that's not too complicated and doesn't take too long. I think this game fits really well in that category because what I saw was like everyone's like, as you mentioned, there's different engines you could build, there's different sort of ways to score points, and you feel really clever about it, but it's never too complicated. You're never gonna. It doesn't feel like something where someone's going to outsmart you, really, because kind of all the options and all the strategies are open to everybody. Besides what you said, you could spend those Vikings that you've been collecting. That builds your engine, and then you spend them to buy lands that might give you points. But these lands that you buy also create a new engine on your board where you could spend bracelets to trade, and that's a free action that you can take on top. So then you start to feel really clever. It's like, oh, if I do this, and then at least this, and then I spend these tokens to get these trades, and then all of a sudden you're like, I just scored 15 points out of the 40 that you kind of need, and it feels really rewarding. So that at the very end, the last couple rounds gets really, really exciting. I feel like with people like taking big swings and getting a lot of points. So yeah, it's a fun game.
Mm-hmm.
What do
Yeah.
you think, Christine?
Yeah, I've only played it once, but I really enjoyed that aspect also. With playing with 4 players, I think definitely you're going to run out of those cards as people are hoarding those Vikings, and there's ways where like, oh, well, like we had a friend who was hoarding a lot of Vikings, so when she had to discard it, what I like about, there's this like, I don't remember what it's called, that one card that is like a separate like bonus every single game where you randomize it, that like black card.
Oh, the artifact.
Artifact, yeah. So with the different artifacts, there's things that trigger them, and so we had one where if you like get all 5 colors, you get a particular bonus. And so she very strategically was like, I'm going to discard this one color because there's only one card there. When I get it back, then I know I'm going to be able to trigger that benefit again, So I like that there's a lot of variety where I could see a lot of other artifacts coming in and changing the gameplay. I got started a little bit late with my points, but even by the end I was scoring like a lot of points at a time, so it just was very satisfying, even though I was like not winning.
Well, I'll definitely have to check out the artifacts. I haven't actually played with them yet. I know they're in the. I saw them in the base box, but I haven't done anything with them yet. And I don't know if they're available on BGA or not. But our game didn't have them.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's very. You just pick one for the game, and then, like Christina mentioned, it adds new strategies that you do, and I don't think it complicates the game that much. Like I would even for like a first time player, I think they're worth putting in. Yeah. So you've been showing it to a lot of like new players, like inexperienced players, very experienced players, like.
For me, I've just been showing it to folks in my game group. So these tend to be folks who are very experienced gamers. But it's, folks have reasonably liked it. I think I've been maybe the highest on it for some reason. It has just really clicked with me, and I've just really enjoyed it. But it's been well received. So.
Yeah, it's really cool art too. It's like very. They have the giant kind of tarot side cards and stuff. So it's a really appealing game.
It's just so nice to have a game that's that time length, right? That it actually has some meat to it. That you actually are making really interesting decisions, right? Because even with people that want to get a really weighty game to the table, you're waiting for everyone to show up, or everyone has, we could squeeze in a little something extra at the end.
It's that perfect filler game right now, I think.
Yeah,
so. But we brought you here to talk about Wyrmspan, of course. So, so when did development on Wyrmspan start for Connie, for Elizabeth? Like, how did this start? What was the kernel that began everything?
Yeah, so I can pick it up in the beginning of 2022. I don't know if Elizabeth can go back farther than that. But from my standpoint, at least, I had been working with Jamie Stegmeyer on Apiary, and he basically reached out in early 2022, so about 2 years ago, and said, "Hey, I don't even know if this would be possible. We're looking at designing something else in the Wingspan series. We'd obviously need to talk to Elizabeth and get her sign-off. That's an important prerequisite. But would you be at all interested in designing a spin-off to Wingspan featuring dragons?" And I said, yes. Why, yes, in fact. And then we kind of ran the idea by Elizabeth, and then we're sort of off to the races at that point. But Elizabeth, I don't know if you have any background that goes back farther than that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't particularly remember the interaction that much. I think I just got an email from Jamie asking if I was okay with that and okay with you doing it. And there's like a set of repeated requests that we get for Wingspan spin-offs, and Dragons is one of them.
Oh, interesting.
From fans?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And that sort of makes sense to me, because when it was announced, finally, Wyrmspan, I was like, first, is this an April Fool's joke? And then second, I'm going to buy this automatically. So that was my first time impression. And that's amazing that Jamie thought like, Connie is going to be a good match for this too. And then you two are both in the same play group in that area. Yeah.
We're both in the DC area, and I know Elizabeth a few years ago started a really wonderful a group for game designers. So we had knew each other from that.
Awesome. And so was it a lot of pressure to go into this Wingspan world for you, Connie?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at this point in time I had designed Apiary, but Apiary wasn't quite done yet, and I didn't have any published games, and recognized that a spin-off sequel to, one of the most popular Euro games of our generation, by a relatively new designer, by a female designer, was going to certainly get a lot of attention, for both good and for ill. And, there's a lot of pressure to kind of keep up the brand name and everything, and not to let Elizabeth down and not to let Jamie down. So there was definitely some thought that went into signing onto the project. I mean, it was an opportunity that was too good to give up for any number of reasons, but there was definitely I definitely had a lot of trepidation about it as well.
Yeah.
And Elizabeth, for you, you obviously you signed off on it and agreed to it, but was there a bit of you that's like, I would have liked to have designed this game or made this game?
No, I think Jamie knew not to even ask me.
Oh, really? Why is that?
I mean, I am happy for Dragon a dragon game to exist, but I have like no connection to the whole fantasy sci-fi genre at all. Yeah.
Yeah, and in the past we've talked about in your design sort of process a lot of like the theme really helps inform how you design that game, and so if you have, dragons aren't real, I get it, and so it'd be hard to inform that for you too. It's really interesting. Yeah.
No, and I think also, Jamie knows I have my hands full with the expansions for Wingspan, and if he had had me work on this, it would have delayed those even more. So
there's just so many birds out there, so
yeah.
And so, like, one thing I love about Wyrmspan is how, I definitely get the same spirit of Wingspan in a lot of ways. There's the same objectives per round. You have, you're enticing these dragons, and as you put these dragon cards down, you're getting a better engine, all that stuff. But there's, like, really key differences that I really appreciate to make it a very different game. So, the first thing was that sort of coin economy of like using coins for actions or also very expensive dragons. Was that an early sort of decision, or did that come about later for you?
Yeah, that was actually pretty early on. So it was actually, Wyrmspan was originally conceptualized as a bag builder, where you were essentially building a bag of tokens, and then you would draw out the tokens, which would allow you to take different actions, including exploring your caves. And we found two things. One, it didn't feel a lot like Wingspan. But the other was that I think it probably ratcheted up the complexity level a little bit higher than we wanted it to go, especially for a game that is, supposed to be a little bit more approachable for new gamers. I mean, it's certainly supposed to be a little bit of a step up in complexity from Wingspan, but we didn't want to take it up 3 steps. And it turns out that if you added a joint engine building between the bag and the tableau, that was a lot, and especially for people playing with newer gamers or for kids, if you fell behind, it was just, that was the end. And so we realized that we didn't want that really in the game. So the bag building came out pretty early on, but that kind of more flexible coin and action economy was basically a holdover from that.
Interesting.
And then, obviously, as you mentioned, Wingspan is one of the best-selling, most popular games around. What was the kind of directive, either maybe self-imposed or from Jamie, the founder of Stonemaier, to keep it similar to and familiar to Wingspan players, right? Like how does that decision come about of like, we want it to feel this much like Wingspan, but we need to change this much so it doesn't feel too much like Wingspan?
I feel like that was the sort of intuition, like how do you articulate that, right? And so it was, I think that was one of my big roles working on the game, was that Connie and I sort of met periodically and play tested together and went, like, does that work? And like had a lot of actually really interesting conversations about what makes something feel like Wingspan, like what is the core, and the going through your tableau obviously is one of them, but also sort of that feeling that no matter what you do, you're moving your engine forward a little bit. So the way the mat works in Wyrmspan is pretty different from the structure of the mat in Wingspan, but it still has that fundamental thing that as you build stuff, no matter what you put in the spaces on the mat, just solely because you have built stuff on your mat, you're getting access to more stuff. And so that was one of the things that we figured out that is like part of the special sauce of what makes something feel in the family. And then there's so much other stuff going on in Wyrmspan that's different, and the way, the specifics of all of that even is quite different from Wingspan, but the structure makes it feel related.
Yeah. This is a weird question, but like, Elizabeth, if you had to say Wyrmspan is like a family related to Wingspan, how close of a family member would it be? Would it be like a sibling, a cousin? What would you consider it?
That's a good question. What do you think, Connie? Sibling or cousin?
I'd say maybe like step sibling. Can we go like halfway in between?
Okay, I see that.
Halfway in between.
No blood relation.
Yeah.
No,
There's half of a blood relation. There's Elizabeth, so there you go.
Right?
But
It's also... Oh, sorry. Go
Oh,
ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, I do think, just to really kind of emphasize what Elizabeth was saying is, I think I do remember a couple times where she was like, Connie, this is interesting, but this isn't Wingspan. Like, this doesn't feel like Wingspan anymore. And for a while, we had a very, very different kind of mat that you were building out. It didn't look anything like the Wingspan mat, and I think that was really when it started feeling a lot like Wingspan, is when we basically made the Wyrmspan cave mat a lot more similar to the player mat in Wingspan. And that seemed, all of a sudden, at that point in time, it kind of clicked, and we were like, oh, okay, this is starting to feel like it is, kind of maybe the appropriate relationship to Wingspan.
And Connie, did you get any? I'm curious. I have no idea, like what it sounds like, but just like I said, our experience was from like our people we've talked to, our circle of friends who are familiar with Wingspan and has heard about Wyrmspan. Did you get a lot of any kind of heat about like, hey, you're ripping off Wingspan, and people don't understand that this was intentionally designed to be part of the same family?
I think my favorite was after it was first announced. I think a lot of folks had a similar reaction to you guys, which is like, is this an April Fool's joke? No, wait, it's January. I think my favorite, though, was a thread that somebody posted on BGG, and it was titled something like, will there be a lawsuit? And basically, like, and the body of the thread was just, does the designer of Wingspan know about this? Like, that you're ripping off a game or something like that. And so I think there was a little bit of, that kind of stuff right at the beginning. I think at this point in time, there's enough copies of the game around, and there have been enough reviews that anyone who wants to know about Wyrmspan and has any kind of desire to actually find out the information, it's there. I will say there is still a certain amount of skepticism and I think criticism coming from some of the heavier gamers in particular, that has been something that's sort of come out. It's just a cash grab, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, well, there would have been easier ways to make it a cash grab without hiring someone and an artist and designing a whole new game. But I think some of that has to do more with sort of personal taste than anything. I mean, folks who didn't particularly like Wingspan see this as a little bit more of a cash grab. But I think there's an awful lot of folks who have been very, very excited about it.
Yeah. There's like just even every single dragon card is unique and different, and that's not a quick, fun little thing you can do out of nowhere, right?
No, of course not. And I think anyone who's obviously spent a lot of time, spends any time thinking about it, sort of knows that it's not. We just didn't, we didn't just pull it out of thin air. It's not something that we just kind of willed into being, and then all of a sudden it existed. It's a much more complicated process than that.
And I'm super nerding out, but like I do love the dragon handbook that you have, and there's like really fun little notes about each dragon. Like, I forget now, I'm not nerdy enough to remember which dragon it was, but you can summon it with an amulet, but it finds it extremely offensive when you do. And so I really like that, the little flavor there. Did you write all of those? Did you have a group of people writing all these descriptions? Like, how did this happen?
So I enlisted some friends and family for assistance. I thought I was doing pretty well, and then I realized I was at like 35 or 40, and I was like, oh no, these are all starting to sound the same. Especially because I tend to come at it from I have a science background, and so I tend to come at it from that, and so they sound, like real facts, as if the dragons lived in the real world. And then I was like, wait a second, there's only so many fake dragon facts I can make up about their diet. So I enlisted a bunch of sort of friends and family, and then spent some time reconciling them. But I think it was I think this was a much easier task than coming up with the real bird facts in Wingspan and its expansions. I think this was the easier task of the two by far.
Yeah, I think there's definitely being able to make up the dragons is easier, because you can just make the characteristics all line up and like the way just in the right count of every characteristic crossed in all the right ways. But I don't know for the facts.
I feel like for bird facts,
I have to go
it'd be
find
tough
them,
to
but
pick.
they're out there instead of making them up from scratch.
I would think for bird facts it'd be tough to decide which fact to put on to the card.
Yeah,
I
it
don't
depends
know.
on the bird. Depends on the bird. Some
you have
birds
favorites.
just don't have a lot of interesting stuff going on.
Were there any sort of media influences for some of the dragons, whether it's the story background or their powers or anything like that?
So not exactly. So we really tried. So I mean, full disclosure, I'm a huge science fiction and fantasy nerd. So
Okay,
kind of
I'm gonna have to ask you about those influences soon too. But
Sure,
yes.
absolutely. But we tried to sort of set Wyrmspan in its own kind of unique world. It was not obviously going to be an IP game. I mean, the thought of getting 200 dragon IPs, I would guess that is an insurmountable task. So we tried to kind of almost build it from the ground up. I mean, as if it was kind of its own world. It's the world of Wroth, spelled Wyrth, in which dragons sort of evolved just like our present-day mammals or present-day birds did. And so kind of built out that lore. But obviously, there's a lot of references. I mean, there's, waddles and amphipteers and wyverns and worms and dragons and fey dragons. And there's a million other types of actual dragons that are, pulled from lore. But we kind of tried to make them a little bit unique.
So I was just curious, amphipteers, like you do pronounce the P? I don't know. So I was wondering when I saw those cards.
So it's like, I think it's quasi a silent P, and this is where like you're gonna get comments being like, oh my god, she doesn't know anything about dragons. This is one of those words that is written a lot more than it is perhaps spoken.
Yes, because I don't say that every day, yeah.
Right. I think it's like mostly a silent P, but I always put like a syllable break there, but that just might be my own weird spin on it.
It's been so interesting to me that people are like nitpicking at Connie's dragon lore.
They're fake. Don't know what to tell you.
Well, I was going to say, speaking of that, we've gotten a couple of those comments, and I think one is we've gotten the box dragon isn't a dragon, and that is because in the kind of most strict European canon, a dragon has 4 legs and 2 wings. The dragon on the cover of Wyrmspan is actually a wyvern. But some people are like, that's not a dragon. And I'm like, well, if you want to say it's not a worm, that's a semi-fair criticism. But if you want to say it's not a dragon, I don't know, I have a hard time with that one. The other one we've gotten a lot of comments on is dragon milk. Dragons are reptiles. They're not mammals. They wouldn't produce milk.
Are
Why is
they
there milk in the game?
reptiles?
They're also fake, and also wanted a resource that was going to really kind of shortcut the idea that it was used for the young, and so milk kind of works out well with that. But also my kind of response is that if you have like a warm-blooded giant flying creature, it's going to need a heck of a lot of nutrients. So if you think about it from like an evolutionary standpoint, it's not insane to me that they would have evolved something kind of similar way to get their young those kind of nutrients. But anyway, I will get off my soapbox now.
No, I like that soapbox, first of all. And then the hatchlings, I just want to point out, they're super adorable. So sometimes I get a hatchling just because it's really cute.
They're very cute.
Are there any, like, one more, like, fun story of the development that you thought was, like, really interesting while working on it, or, like, about Wyrmspan?
Not a fun story, but I will just say that really to emphasize how key Elizabeth was with all of this too. I mean, just in really keeping the boat on the correct course, and I think really hitting that. One of the best pieces of feedback that I think I've gotten about Wyrmspan is that it seems like we really hit that balance well of it feels like Wingspan, it feels like an homage to Wingspan, but it also feels like its own game. And I give credit for that, like 98% to Elizabeth, because I think she was really kind of steering that ship.
As I feel
without
that completely.
Actually making any of the game.
But the steering, I think, is important.
Okay, we had some conversations, but Connie made the whole thing. Let's be clear about that.
Okay. The biggest thing that, like, sometimes I hear is like, oh, is it just Wingspan with dragons? And I just can't say no enough, basically, after I played that game. It feels like it, so people will feel it's familiar when you're playing it, but it's definitely its own game, and I could see very different cases for playing either one of them, depending on, what we're in the mood for, who I'm playing with, and I still love both of them, so I'm so excited. Thank you for making it.
Oh, of course.
We do want to leave time to talk about your topic also. So what is your topic, Connie and Elizabeth, today?
I forget. This came up because we just got back from my favorite event of the year. I love Unpub. It happens in the Baltimore suburbs every March. What is it, maybe 150 game designers come and play test their games, and it's open to the public, so we get lots of people that come just to play all of these unpublished games. It's now become like a 4-day long thing. There's a couple of days worth of seminars on like Thursday and Friday, and then it opens up to the public for play testing. And it's a place that we get a lot of work done, but also like it's just awesome to see what other people are working on and to hang out with other designers. Outside of the context of like the big cons where it's crazy and a lot of us are working at booths if we've got a game coming out or something, and so like this is just a much more chill opportunity to really get to know other designers and maybe influence the next big game. It's an event that I definitely play tested Wingspan at for a couple of years before it came out. So.
Did you either of you play test any of your games? You don't have to tell me if you can't, but just if you had any there.
I took a game that I threw together because I had reserved a table at Unpub months ago and then realized that I needed something to take. And I've been working on a Wingspan expansion. At this point, I don't take Wingspan expansions because Stonemaier is so secretive about what's coming out. And it's this venue's a little large to keep secrets in. So I put together a little game that's about walking down the beach and collecting seashells, and they're tiles that you have to put in a bag. So it's like a tile placement sort of Tetris-y thing with things falling down into your bag, and it worked better than I anticipated, so I'm kind of excited about it.
And are you testing games that generally aren't signed yet?
Yeah, it's mostly unsigned. But there are publishers that will come and play test stuff they have in development. It's a real mix. There's people that are like just about to go to Kickstarter with something, but then there's people like me that bring something that they made a week ago.
It was actually sort of cool though. I was playtesting a game. It was a really great game. It was sort of an ant, almost like a tableau building, worker placement, hive building game where your workers aged over the course of the game. So no familiar, but it was a very, very different game than Apiary, but it had obviously some similar mechanisms. I thought it was a really brilliant game. It was a very early stage, but when I was playing it, we actually had one of the CGE folks sit down and was very interested in asking the designer lots of questions. So I think there's definitely some publishers who are there, going around to the table, sort of seeing what's out there, testing the waters and stuff. So I think it's just an absolutely wonderful event. And, I hate the dreaded networking word, but it is an awfully good place to do that in a very kind of chill, relaxed environment. And it's always been very, very welcoming. I mean, I've been showing up for a few years now, and everyone's always been incredibly, incredibly nice and welcoming, so it's a very wonderful event.
Are ants going to be the new bees?
Maybe.
We'll see.
There are a few ant games out there now. I don't know how many of them I've played, but I'm excited for this one. I'm really, really hoping this one goes somewhere.
Is Unpub your favorite also, Connie, or do you have another event that you like too?
So this is going to sound a little bit shallow of me, but I think my favorite event is actually Gen Con. And I think there's a certain amount of nostalgia there as the first of these events that I ever went to. But there's a big part of me that also, I just love the glitz and the glamour and the giant hall and the hustle and bustle and, the big connected network of hotels. And I think for me, and I know this is going to sound silly because a lot of people criticize this about Gen Con, I actually really like how well scheduled it is. In the sense that, I can go ahead of time and sign up for, all right, I know Saturday at 10 o'clock, Saturday at 1 o'clock, Saturday at 4 o'clock, I'm going to have these 3 games to play. These are games that have been on my list of games to play for a long time. They'll be set up. Someone will be teaching them. Here's a new hotness. You can go demo whatever games are being released, the flavor of the month. And I think there's just something about that, I don't know, the glitz and the glamour that I really enjoy. So that's probably my pick, although Unpub is absolutely wonderful, and I'll give a little bit of a shout out to PAX U as well, which is another wonderful event. What about you guys?
You get to be on the other side of the glitz and glamour this August.
I know.
Yeah, I'm guessing I'm gonna like that less, to be honest with you.
We're all suspecting that, but we'll see.
Is it what's from your point of view? And Connie, I don't know if you had enough experience with this yet, but say Unpub demoing an incomplete game and sort of getting feedback on it and kind of gauging people's reactions versus demoing something that's pretty much finished and you're just trying to sell the game as opposed to what's that kind of difference in terms of the energy, your excitement about doing those kind of demos? What's the difference?
Well, yeah, so the thing is that at a place like Unpub, you basically do, a full play test, or, sometimes you'll do a round of a game or something like that. And so you're on for maybe a 10 or 15 minute period where you teach the game, and then you kind of sit back and relax for an hour or so while people play. At PAX U last fall, that was right after Apiary had come out. I was working the booth. Big shout out to my partner David, who was there with me. And it was one of the most exhausting things I've ever done in my life, because we were doing basically a talk through on repeat every 3 minutes for the entire time that we were there, and about halfway through your voice starts going out, and then it just keeps going and keeps going and keeps going. So that for me was much, much more difficult. I know, Elizabeth, if you had the same experience.
I haven't had to demo my own game that much.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Because Wingspan got so big that they decided I would be better off just signing games. It was very weird. And that's fun. I love signing games.
That's easy.
Yeah.
That's easier than talking
You get to meet all the people
minutes.
that are playing your game. They're already convinced that they like it, as opposed to like demoing where you're like trying to convince someone to like your game. Yeah.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, they're all already.
experience.
It's like a pre-selected audience that already likes your product. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
I think it's just so funny though, because I totally get what Connie's saying about the glitz and glamour of Gen Con, but it's still a board game convention, so like the glitz and glamour is like very different.
It's relative, right?
Exactly. I guess that's why I've never been to Essen, so I always feel like, oh, I wonder what that's. It's even bigger than Gen Con, and Gen Con is like the biggest thing to me right now. So I know Shu agrees with you on Gen Con. That's his favorite event. Right, Shu?
Yeah, I same as you, Connie, where a little bit of like just fondness because that was one of our first big conventions. So I always have some fondness for it. I think the more we've done this, like going analog, and the more companies reach out to us to have meetings, to do demos, the less I kind of like it. Like I appreciate, we've definitely appreciate like publishers reaching out and wanting to meet with us and show us games and things like that. And so we're fortunate, for that. We're appreciative of that. But it's also like, I loved Gen Con before we were doing content, we're just going for fans. No work obligations whatsoever, so we're just free to do whatever we want, like whatever caught our fancy. I love the feeling of walking up and down the exhibit aisles and just like, that game looks interesting. I don't know what it is, never heard of it. It just visually caught my eye. Something about it caught my eye. Or I'll hear someone talk about, give an elevator pitch, and I'm like, oh, that sounds interesting. Let's sit down and do a 10-minute demo, and just to kind of get a taste of what this game is about. And we've also had experiences where I'm like, I was really looking forward to this game, and then we did a demo. I'm like, I now don't want to buy that game because that was way different than what I imagined in my head. But I love that kind of experience of just getting a little taste of a million different things, and then kind of figuring out what you might want to buy, what you might want to play later with your group, or you start thinking like, oh, this friend will really like this game, and this group will really like this game. I can't wait to bring it back. And I just love that energy. And then so Gen Con is definitely my favorite game. I also like that it's in a downtown of like a decent sized city. So there's like a lot of restaurants you can go to.
Interconnected hotels that are exciting. Well, if you're lucky enough to get one of those hotels too.
Yeah. This year we're like out
Pretty
by the
unlucky.
airport, so we got an unlucky draw for the hotels. But yeah, I love that energy. And then we always come back from Gen Con with at least 25 to 30 games. So we bring a giant empty suitcase with us and fill up everything.
Each have our own empty suitcase on top of our regular one. So it's an issue.
But I know that's not your favorite con. You like it.
Yeah.
But your favorite con, Christina?
I actually like BGG Con in fall in Dallas. Yes, it's in Dallas area. For me, I feel like it strikes a really good balance between being a con with events that you can attend and panels and, a pretty small exhibitor floor, but, sort of fun. You can wander that a little bit. And mainly it just feels like board gaming summer camp to me, where I get to go, everything's in the hotel, I play until whatever time I want and then go to sleep and wake up and repeat. I also really, really love the past few years we've been hosting our board game quiz show live, sort of like a pub trivia thing. And I was just telling Elizabeth before we started that my pub trivia team made our state championships in our division this year. So I just finished that and did not win, but I love pub trivia. So I like being able to host that for other people too. So I like the vibe of BGG Con. It's chill, and we have some friends from the East Coast that come, and we come from the West Coast, so it's sort of semi in the middle. And there's barbecue, so I like barbecue.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah, I am much more suited to the size of BGG Con than Gen. Like, I find Gen Con just too huge. But yeah, BGG Con, I love that you can just go, like, literally just play game after game after game out of the library. Yeah.
I think this year I started a three-player game with the Marine Worlds expansion of Ark Nova at 12:30 in the morning. So, which people were questioning, but I do not regret it. So I had a great time.
Connie, have you been to BGG Con?
No, I haven't. But I've heard similar takes from a lot of folks now. So I think we definitely have to add it to the rotation. I'd really like to check it out.
Yeah, that's a very close second for me, for the reasons Christina said. Because you can still, at Gen Con, after the exhibitor hall closes, after dinner, you still have plenty of opportunities to play games. Like, every hotel has rooms open up for you. The hall itself at Gen Con, they open up halls, but you're generally more exhausted, where BGG Con is just, like, very relaxed. You're just, like, take your time, stroll downstairs, you're you usually are staying at that hotel, and they have such the biggest library I've ever seen. I like Dice Tower West as well, mainly because it's closer to us. We could drive to it. It's in Vegas, so it's about 4 hours away from us. We could sell a bunch of games there and be able to drive those games there to sell. And then and it's Vegas, which has its own energy in itself, right? Like places to go eat, places to stay out late and party or drink, or like we have friends who like gambling and such. So it's like a very more party environment. But BGG Con I definitely really, really love, just because it's like, it depends what I'm in the mood for. If I'm like, I just want to hang out with my friends, I don't want to do anything else but just play games, BGG Con is the best for me. And I feel like someone brought up PAX Unplugged. I've been to that as well. I do like that because it's in Philadelphia. There's a lot of good places to eat nearby. And I feel like if you can only go, you want some of Gen Con, you want some of BGG Con, PAX U is probably somewhere in between. I don't think it does either as well. But if you want, like, I want a fairly big exhibitor hall. It's not quite as big. It's nowhere as big as Gen Con's, but it has a decent-sized exhibitor hall, and then lots of places to play games as well. So it's sort of in between those two, I think.
Haven't been.
Yeah.
And yes, I think the big thing is I just can't not go to Gen Con, I think. I don't know. I think we're too much of the early adopters and want to know the new things, so we're always there. So, yeah.
Well, it's hard not to get a little bit caught up into that, too, especially, I think, as a designer, too. I'm always like, oh, what's the new hotness? What are people playing? What does everyone like? What are the trends,
Yeah.
But yeah, one day I really hope to make it to Essen, too. I mean, just as kind of a bucket list item. I mean, just to, sort of see the OG Giant Con out there, but not this year, but maybe some year.
Same.
Have you been to Essen, Elizabeth?
Yes. Yeah,
Yes.
I went in 2019.
Oh, yes. And so what can you tell us about it? Because we are all just curious. Haven't been.
The exhibitor hall feels like Gen Con, but bigger, spread across multiple halls. It is harder to sit down and play a game, has been my experience. There's no open play area.
Okay.
And the publisher booths are generally demos where you're not playing. Sometimes they're playing a full game. It really depends. But because that's the only way to play games, there's a lot of demand for the tables at all the publisher booths if a game has any notoriety at all. So I find it really hard to play games. I pulled rank at one publisher booth.
I love hearing this.
So tell us what happened.
Yes.
Well, it's just like I went and introduced myself to the guys working the booth and like found the owner of the company and was like, I really wanted to check out this game. And he was like, oh, you're checking out this game.
That must be rewarding.
But I try not to abuse that too much. Other people want to play the games too.
Just here and there.
Here and there, I think you're allowed to do such a thing. Like, we don't sense a big ego coming from you, Elizabeth, so don't worry.
the final one I wanted to talk about briefly was just we did do one of the Tokyo game markets when we were in Japan last year, and that was fascinating too. It was a lot of very small games. People demonstrate, like demoing their own games that they've made. A lot of really quirky, interesting stuff. Obviously, language was a bit of an issue for us because we are not Japanese. But for people who could sort of describe the game, or we could look at it, or they had some English instructions, it was really fascinating. I bought this tiny little game called Niece Code, and it was this little cat programming game where you had to like program your moves out for your cat to get the golden fish and then take it back to your house, but along the way a truck randomly spilled a bunch of tires, and so you have to watch out for the tires along the way. And everything was just so fun and fascinating, and people were like just really, really welcoming at that show too. We had a really good time there.
Yeah, there were a lot of games that like, oh, this looks really cute. If there's no English instructions, we're kind of like, I don't know if we can really play this game. But you look for the games that look like they're simple enough and they have some English in them that we could kind of work itself out. But yeah, that was a cool show.
Yeah. We also went in the wrong line like 3 times and took forever to get in there. But anyway, that's our problem. We know better now. But thanks so much for joining us. We had so much fun talking with you today. And I would love to know, where can people follow you? What if there anything that we can look forward to that you can talk about? We'd love to hear it. What about you, Connie? Where can people follow you again?
Yeah, sure. So I'm at Connie VDC on both Twitter and Blue Sky, and not particularly active on either, though I am trying. Yeah, and there's not really anything that I could talk about right now, but hoping to
Working on
publish,
stuff.
hoping to design many more games.
Exciting. I will definitely be paying attention to that. And you, Elizabeth?
I have a website, elizhargrave.com, ELIZ Hargrave.com.
And your newsletter?
That's sort of, there's a link to my Blue Sky and to my newsletter, and to the form for requesting Wingspan birds and all kinds of different things on there.
Are there ways to request dragons, Connie? I don't know. Maybe we'll work on that.
Yeah, I guess I have some homework.
Thanks for listening to all of our listeners. Give us a rating if you can, and definitely check out Wyrmspan. I cannot tell you how much fun we had with that recently. Something's happening.
It sounds like a cat's like destroying things in the background.
No, it's actually my automated cat feeder that goes off at 9:00. So I'm sorry about that.
Okay.
No worries.
Which means you
Very
get the food,
important.
and then you get the cat scrambling to go get the food.
Our editor, Mike Zipkin, is the best ever, of course, and we promise we are working on season 5 of the Board Game Quiz Show. Right, Shu?
Yeah, it's all set, but I just having trouble getting one of the guests to kind of get her schedule nailed down. So
Okay. Now you can stop listening and go play a game, everybody. Bye.
bye.
Bye, all.